Let me know when we're ready. Good afternoon and welcome to the February crop production and WASDE briefings. My name is Joe Parsons. I serve as chair of the National Agricultural Statistics Service Ag Statistics Board here at USDA. This briefing is for the secretary and other policymakers at the department to better understand the content and context of today's reports. We're pleased to have Dr. Seth Meyer, USDA's chief economist, as our secretary designate today. We're also pleased to have Kimberly Nessie, director of USDA's Office of Pest Management Policy, with us today as well. Dr. Meyer, as you're aware, our February report contains citrus crops, and Mr. Mark Hudson of our Florida office provided excellent assistance with that aspect of today's report. I have a few notes for our web conference and video streaming audience. The crop production and WASDE reports are considered principal federal economic indicator reports. The Office of Management Budget provides specific guidance on how these important reports are to be released and managed. OMB directs policymaking officials to not make public comment within 1 hour of the release of these reports. Federal statistical agencies are guided to provide for a wide distribution of information in a variety of formats and be open about our processes and procedures. In order to share this briefing widely, while meeting OMB guidance, we will pause the live stream when answering questions from policymakers. You'll see a notice that we're addressing a question in the room. We will not be taking questions in this briefing from the public. However, NASS and World Board staff are available for email or phone questions, and NASS will host a social media event 1 hour after the release of the crop production report. We strive to have everything at this briefing match the official record. Should there be any discrepancy between what is presented at this briefing and the published estimates, always refer to the official published estimates. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Lance Honig, Chief of the NASS Crops Branch. He will be immediately followed by Dr. Mark Jekanowski, Chair of the World Ag Outlook Board. Lance?
All right, thank you, Joe, and welcome to everybody here this afternoon. I appreciate you joining us for the presentation today. February is actually one of the shorter crop production reports that we do throughout the year, and so I'll have a fairly brief presentation, but I'll still move through it fairly quickly. But if you've got any questions along the way, Seth, you can certainly stop me, or we can handle those at the end as we typically do, whatever your preference might be. Before I get into the numbers, though, if you were looking at the published report, you would see we've got a special note on the front page of that report, just reminding folks that we know there were some freezing temperatures in Florida January 28th through 30th. We don't know exactly what the full impact may have been on the citrus crops yet at this point, so impact is not necessarily fully reflected in the report here today. But just as a reminder, we will be looking at the next forecast for the citrus crops in the March crop production report. And so we'll just see what type of new information we have by then and go from there. Before we look at the numbers, just let me give you a little background about where the estimates came from. First of all, for Florida citrus, we did have a couple of survey efforts done down in Florida. First is the objective measurement, which of course they do most every month. This month they visited 1,564 groves between January 10th and 24th. Of course, the objective measurement is where they're essentially measuring the size of the fruit and then the drop rate, or in other words, how much of the fruit has fallen off the trees before being able to reach full maturity and be harvested. So that was the information that was gathered at that point. In addition to that, this month, they also conducted their row count survey. You can see nearly 115,000 rows observed. They're going out to determine how many of those rows have been harvested. It gives us a measure of harvest completeness for the various crops. And you can see that work was conducted January 25th and the 26th. And then in addition to that, when we get to this point in the season, particularly for the non-Valencias at this point, we also utilize some of the administrative data, particularly on utilization. That comes from the Florida Citrus Administrative Committee. Basically, they provide the quantity of fruit that was packed or processed, and obviously that's a good indication of what's been produced, and so that we factor that into our forecasts as well. So with that said, let's go ahead and take a look at the updated citrus forecast. I would remind you, because it's February, Only Florida is reporting this month, so any changes you see from the previous forecast are driven by changes specifically in Florida. We are now forecasting all orange production at 3.879 million tons. That is down 1.1% from the previous forecast. We're now down 12.4% year over year. Basically, that change is due to a 1 million box reduction from January on the Florida Valencia portion of the crop in particular. As we look at the non-Valencias, about 87% of that crop's harvested at this point. Of course, no change from last month's forecast. Looking at the Valencias in Florida, harvest is really just getting underway there, so we've still got a ways to go on the Valencia portion of the crop in Florida. Looking at the grapefruit, no change from last month's forecast, so we're still looking at 378,000 tons produced there. That's down 11.3% from what was produced last season. No change to the lemon crop at 976,000 tons, and the tangerines at 878,000 tons, also unchanged from last month, but down 24.7% from what was produced last season. The only other crop that I have information on for you today is sugarcane. You can see we're now forecasting 935,000 acres harvested. That's down just 0.3% from the previous forecast. It's 1.4% below what was harvested last season. Yield, we're now forecasting 35.8 tons per acre. That's up 1.7% month over month. It is still down 6% from the final yield last season. That puts our new production forecast at 33.461 million tons. That is up 1.3% from last month, down 7.3% from what was produced last season. This next slide just highlights some of the upcoming reports over the next month or so. You can see I've got a pretty full slide there. We've got a lot of reports coming out over the next month. Just to highlight a couple of them, next Thursday, you see we've got our first ever National Hemp Report. A lot of folks looking forward to some new information there. On the 18th, Farms and Land and Farms, county estimates for corn, sorghum, and soybeans. That's always a popular release time. You can see that'll be on the 24th, along with our crop values report. Cattle on feed on the 25th, ag prices at the end of the month. Of course, when the calendar rolls around to March, you'll see our monthly care reports as well as the annual reports for those three happening that day. Rice County estimates on the 3rd of March, and then of course March 9th will be our next crop production report as well. Just a quick reminder to folks that February 24th and 25th, the USDA will be hosting our 98th annual Ag Outlook Forum. Of course, it'll be a virtual event, so lots of opportunities for folks to participate there. As Joe mentioned at the top of the briefing, we'll be on Twitter this afternoon. I'll be hosting our Stat Chat session for folks to be able to log on there and ask any questions that they might have about today's report. And then a bonus session of Stat Chat this month. I mentioned the hemp report coming out next week. I'll actually be doing an additional Stat Chat that afternoon. So that report's released at 3 o'clock. So at 4 o'clock Eastern, I'll be on Twitter again, fielding any questions that folks might have about that first ever hemp release. And so that's actually the last slide that I have for you today. If you'd like to ask any questions now, I'll take care of them for you now, or if you prefer to wait, I will pass the baton over to Mark.
Well, let's roll them all into the end, Lance, if you would. Thank you, sir.
Sounds perfect. Thank you very much.
All right, very good. Thank you, Lance. That was quick. You didn't give me very much time to prepare my my presentation here, so we'll see how that goes. So real quick, jumping right in. Good afternoon, everyone. So quick overview of our presentation today. This month, this time of year, generally, we're always looking very closely at South American crops. This month in particular, we're taking a close focus on Brazil's soybean crop and first crop corn harvest. Corn crop, where harvest is underway in Brazil. As you know, soybean harvest starting in the northern part of the country and continuing on south. Main takeaways from our Brazil focus this month is that we lowered our production forecasts for both the soybean crop and the first crop corn based on dry conditions, especially in the subtropical regions of the country. And I'm missing a slide. Oops, sorry about that. So very dry conditions in the subtropical parts of the country, and really abundant moisture in the center, west, and northern areas of the country. So I had a nice slide here that just kind of showed gave an overview of the difference in the moisture conditions from the northern part of the country to the south. But instead I'll just go through some rainfall traces here. A couple things to keep in mind when we're thinking about Brazil. As you know, the center, west, and northern part of the country accounts for about 60% or more of soybean production. Their rainfall moisture levels have been abundant. Crop is coming out very good. Second crop corn is going in under very good conditions, but it's really in the southern part of the country, particularly Paraná and Mato Grosso do Sul, where conditions have been extremely dry, and you know, we have growing concerns about the yields and crop yields in those areas. So real quick, Paraná here, and you can see its location on the Brazil map. Crop underwent significant stress. Dryness from mid-November up through about the end of December. And there's been some decent rains since then toward, into January and more recently, but nevertheless, much of that damage was likely already done. We're watching that crop closely in Paraná, but clearly some yield loss because of that earlier drought stress. Now, and at the same time, not only has it been dry, but also relatively hot as well. So it's been hot and dry, potentially jeopardizing those yields. Moving into a little bit further south into Rio Grande do Sul, it's been even drier there. Been even drier in this part of the country. Dry since, really since late October, and a little bit of rain along the way, but overall well below average in terms of total moisture. And one important thing to keep in mind here, despite all this drought stress that's apparent currently, it's really the next 2 weeks or so that are critical. Good rains going forward and over the next 10 to 15 days could generate some recovery in soybeans and corn areas in that region. But as it stands right now, those crops are under a lot of stress. And not only has it been dry, but it's also been quite warm as well. So clearly those crops, soybean and first crop corn in that area of the country is under some stress. Now contrast that with the northern part of the country and center west, Mato Grosso right here, as you can see, above average rainfall throughout much of the growing season. Excellent moisture. Soybean harvest is advancing rapidly, and corn planting is also advancing rapidly as the soybeans come off the field. In contrast to last year, where corn went in relatively late. This year, it's going in quite early, which bodes well for the crop, potentially capturing more of that rainy season moisture, and likely reducing yield risks. Bahia, also northern part of the country, a little bit further east. Again, plentiful moisture, well above average, very good conditions for the soybean crop that's coming off and corn crop that's going in. So with all of that, offsetting pressures between the northern part of the country and the southern part, we did cut our soybean yield and production forecast this month again, fairly sharp cut. cut soybean production by 5 million tons. Yield will be the lowest in the past 6 years. Corn as well, cut the yields a bit, but again, the key factor to keep in mind here is it's really that second crop that dominates in Brazil. And right now, the conditions for that second crop going in are quite well. So we cut yields this month based on dry conditions for that first crop corn in the southern part of the country. But overall, for Brazil in general, we're looking at record area, record production, again, assuming a good second crop. So with that, let me jump into soybeans and corn, our balance sheets, global production. As you see here, fairly significant cut to global production this month, driven by those dry conditions in southern Brazil. And as you can also imagine, it's not only southern Brazil, it's that entire region. Paraguay is part of it, Argentina as well. That part of the South American continent generally under drought conditions. So we cut our production forecast for Brazil, Argentina, and Paraguay, all reflecting that those dry conditions in that part of the continent. Global supply and use. We talked about production, fairly large cut there. We also cut crush globally. That's mainly driven by reduced crush in China and South America. Again, smaller crop in South America. Not too surprising that we're going to see or expect a smaller crush there as well. Trade down as well. So exports, that's mainly lower exports out of South America. And then when thinking about exports, for every export, there's an import. So on the import side, that would be lower imports from China and also lower imports by Argentina, which is a smaller volume of soybeans coming in from Paraguay, where, as I noted, we cut production there as well. So that's trade. And then China, you can see China imports down in our addendum here at the end, at the bottom, and lower crush in China as well. U.S. balance sheet, soybeans, a little bit of a different picture in terms of crush. We raised our crush forecast there, as you can see, this month, up 25 million bushels. Strong margins, strong pace of crush, and also strong meal exports. So raised our crush forecast there, and that's also consistent with the tightening South American supplies. And all of that increased crush came out of stocks. So ending stocks forecast down by an equivalent amount. Price forecasts increased to this month. Shouldn't be too much of a surprise there. Seth, as I'm sure you've been watching futures markets and cash prices, very strong for soybeans lately, driven by those concerns about South American dryness. So let's move into corn, into the corn balance sheets. In terms of corn production, again, cut in global corn production, driven mainly by Brazil, as you can see there. And again, that's the first crop, Brazil corn harvest, still anticipating a record crop overall in Brazil at 114 million tons. Driven heavily by that second crop, safrinha crop, which we expect to be strong. And then the other country on here that it's worth noting that isn't actually listed, but Paraguay, of course, again, reflecting those dry conditions in that entire region, Paraguay's corn production forecast was also reduced. Supply and use, you'll note here that I put up both the current year and the back year. Put up the back year supply and use table just to point out that trade forecast. Increased trade from the back year, reflecting And I think we talked about this last month as well, but stronger than expected late season exports out of Brazil and Argentina. And what that does is tighten up ending stocks a little bit, and therefore also tighten up the beginning stocks coming into the new crop year. Feed use up a little bit. That's mainly reflecting increases in Iran and Canada. And trade down a bit. That's a smaller crop in Paraguay. Again, this is looking forward into that new crop, and ending stocks tightening up just a bit, as you can see, relative to where we were last month. Corn domestic balance sheet, really nothing to see here, no changes. Same price, no other, nothing else to report on that balance sheet. So let's move into wheat. World wheat production, again, pretty non-eventful month in terms of global wheat crop right now. Foreign production or world production down, based mainly on lower production in Iraq and Syria. New area estimates there, and then a little bit of an adjustment for Kazakhstan based on government data. Overall, a little bit of a tightening up of global wheat supplies. So supply and use, as I noted, the production change pretty minor. Feed use up a bit, so that's driven mainly by Canada, an increase in feed residual in Canada, reflecting the latest data from StatCan's stocks report, and that's offset to some degree by lower feed and residual or lower feed use in China, where, as you know, wheat isn't quite as competitive as it was against other feed grains, especially corn, in previous months. Trade, that's mainly driven, that increase in trade is mainly driven by India, where our forecast for Indian wheat exports from India is raised to a record 7 million metric tons. And also a little bit of an increase exports out of Argentina as well, reflecting what appears to have been a pretty good harvest this past spring for them. And then ending stocks tightening up a little bit on the global wheat balance sheet, as you can see. Domestic balance sheet, a few changes here. I noted earlier, no new NAS information today, but there is new NAS information that was incorporated into this balance sheet that had been previously released, including data from the flour milling products report, and based on that, we pulled back our wheat food use estimate by 3 million bushels. That's all durum wheat, reduction there. Seed use down as well. That's also based on NAS data. And exports, of course, we're always monitoring export pace as it occurs and as it's updated. Pulled back our export forecast this month. That's all HRW and white. And the specific breakdown is that we pulled hard red winter back by 10 million bushels and white back by 15 million bushels. Prices are strong. We raised again our season average market price up to by 15 cents per bushel this month. If realized, $7.30 would be the highest price since the 2012-2013 crop year. And also worth noting that this year-to-year change in market price from one year to the next, that would be the biggest change, year-to-year change since 2007-2008. So strong prices in wheat lately, as you can see. All right, moving into rice. Again, on the world production side, relatively small changes overall. Brazil production forecast, we pulled that back a little bit, as you can see. And just not too surprising there. Most of the rice in Brazil is produced in those southern areas of the country that we talked about earlier that are experiencing some drought, some dryness. So we'll see some possible losses there, accounting for that. The increase in Bangladesh, that's just an estimate from Post that we adopted. Pakistan increased our forecast for rice production in Pakistan. That would be a new record, 8.7 million tons. And they are reaping the benefits of starting to adopt hybrid seeds in Pakistan. So seeing some yield growth there. And Philippines, that's also just based on government data. So rice supply and use production, I didn't mention this on the previous slide, but worth noting that production is now forecast at a record high production. Stocks are near record. You see we're just down a tiny bit from last year, year over year, down to last year would have been the record. So we're close to a record this year as well. Increased trade on that balance sheet, that is driven almost entirely by India, increased shipments from India. And also just worth noting, ending stocks up. Globally, China holds about 60% of those stocks, about 61% in fact. U.S. supply and demand, a few changes here, mainly focused on trade updates. Imports down 500,000 hundredweight. Now you'll recall in previous months, several previous months, we were pulling imports down based on smaller imports of long grain, especially from Asia. In this case, this adjustment this month is lower medium and short grain rice imports, and that reflects reduced shipments into Puerto Rico from China, shipments that are presumably delayed and just could be shifted into the next crop year, but kind of a slowdown in shipments into Puerto Rico from China. Exports, that's also medium short grain, pulled our export forecast down by 1 million hundredweight there. Long grain is unchanged, but again, just reflecting relatively slow pace. And again here as well, increased our season average price forecast for rice up 60 cents per hundredweight based on gas prices and current futures market activity. All right, let's move into cotton. Again, pretty small changes globally on the production side, driven mainly by a reduction in India. And this is, again, kind of based on, official data from India. Slower than expected arrivals suggest that yields might not be quite what we had expected. So we pulled our production forecast back based on that. Also worth noting, and not listed in this in this table, list of countries, Tanzania, we reduced the production estimate there as well, based on government data, lower area than we had been carrying. Global balance sheet for cotton, pretty small changes overall. A few that I'll note, beginning stocks up a bit. That mainly reflects some historic revisions, some historic adjustments to Iran and Syria. Always going back and rechecking that data, and back several years, and as a result, we're carrying in a little bit higher stocks globally than we had been expecting. Trade down a bit, mainly based on lower imports by China. Kept their consumption the same, and as you can see there, the result being China stocks tightening up a bit. But that reduction in trade, that's that's mainly China there, and a little bit tighter ending stocks, just about consistent with the reduction in production. So there you go. U.S. cotton supply and demand balance sheet, again, mainly focusing on on updates to trade data. Export shipments have been relatively slow, possibly due to some logistics issues in the shipping industry. So we'll continue to watch that, wait and see if those shipments pick up. But as of now, it doesn't appear that they're on pace to meet our previous forecast. So we pulled our export forecast back accordingly, 250,000 bales. And we kept prices the same, kept our season average price the same at 90 cents a pound. And as I noted last month, that would be, if achieved, that would be a record based on what's currently in the existing NAS databases. Steve McDonald mentioned might not be an actual record. You can go back to the Civil War times and maybe find a higher price. But for recent history, that's certainly a record. All right, so moving into sugar. Pretty small changes here as well in our balance sheet. Now you see we did increase production a little bit here, 49,000 short tons. That's reflecting a larger crop in Louisiana, or larger sugar production in Louisiana, just based on industry sources that recovery rates are strong, and that crop appears to be a little bit bigger than we had anticipated. Imports, small adjustment there based on customs revisions. As you recall, the TRQ was extended into December 31st, so they're still just updating that data, revising it, finalizing it, and based on those revisions, we pull our import forecast back a bit. Nothing else changes. All of it just goes down into ending stocks. Mexico balance sheet. Didn't change our production forecast there. Harvest is underway. All conditions look good. Good harvest. No concerns as of right now to suggest any production cut. And as you can see, that would be a fairly big increase year over year in Mexico's production. Imports down a bit, again based on data, and probably not too surprising there as well, given the pretty large increase in production year over year. Only other changes to note here: domestic use up a bit based on data on deliveries to the IMEX program, and then exports in Mexico also determined residually, so exports down a bit, and that's all to countries outside of the U.S. Outside of the U.S. suspension agreement amounts, so smaller exports to third countries. All right, let's move into round things out here with livestock, meat, and dairy. So with beef production up this month, 210 million pounds. Mainly what's driving that is heavy first half placements expected, offset to some degree by lower cow slaughter, but heavier placements. I mean, recall that especially with wheat prices high, there's a little bit less incentive to keep for wheat grazing of cattle. More cattle moving into feedlots, heavier placements. That's going to show up as higher beef production. Again, offset a little bit by lower cow slaughter. Pork production down 140 million pounds, mainly just based on slaughter pace, a little bit slower than expected. Poultry production down as well, both broilers and turkey. Again, based on slaughter pace, and for broilers, hatchery data as well suggesting lower production, and also looking ahead toward higher feed prices, which is likely also to cause a little bit of a disincentive for expansion as well. So turkey down about 20 million pounds. Prices, steer prices up 75 cents a hundredweight, strong packer demand. Hog prices up strongly this month. Again, strong demand, strong packer demand, and tighter supplies. Strong meat prices as well for both beef and pork. So continuing to adjust those prices higher. Broilers as well, broilers and turkey increased our price forecasts there as well, again, just based on current price strength and strong demand. Meat trade. The main number that jumps out at you here on meat trade is pork exports down again this month, just like we discussed last month. That's mainly a China story. Now, this isn't just U.S. exports to China. It's more the fact that China itself is importing less globally, importing less pork globally. So not only are we going to export less pork to China, but we're going to have to compete harder for exports into all of those other countries that previously had also been supplying China. So, again, this decrease is driven by China, but the actual reduction in exports is spread across many countries. Broilers and turkey, there too, also down, exports down. Again, that's based on smaller shipments to many markets. No real dominant market there, except in with turkeys. Lower exports to Mexico is particularly noteworthy there as well. Beef imports up this month, reflecting strong demand for processing grade beef. And those high prices that we talked about, high beef prices, would be consistent with that. So let's move into dairy, finish things up here. U.S. milk and supply and demand cut production here by 500 million pounds. And this just reflects entirely reflects lower cow numbers. And you saw that in the cattle report came out last month. Lower cow numbers means lower production. So that's driving our forecast there. In terms of our imports and exports, fat basis, I'd point out butter is important in terms of higher imports and lower exports. High U.S. prices for butter, not surprising, pulling in more from overseas, and tight supplies are cutting back on our exports a bit. That's largely a price story. And then when you look at the skim solids basis exports, they're down a bit this month. That's mainly whey and non-fat dry milk there. Lower export volumes expected. Finally, in terms of prices, these kind of price strength across the board, consistent with lower production. As I just noted, butter, very strong demand there. Butter price almost $2.40 per pound, now $2.39 per pound exactly. Strong demand, high international prices for non-fat dry milk, supporting those prices there as well. And with those high product prices, that falls right into the class prices and ultimately into the all milk price, all of which are strongly higher this month. All milk price of $23.55 per hundredweight would be the highest since 2014. And note the $4.86 per hundredweight increase year over year. And with that ends the formal part of my presentation in terms of the WASDE content. Thank you all for attending. And now we can end the live recording and turn it over to Seth if he has any questions or wants any clarifications.